The fluorescent lights of Rosewood Diner buzzed like dying insects at 2:47 a.m., casting harsh shadows across cracked vinyl booths and coffee-stained linoleum. While Nashville's elite slept in silk sheets, Sophia Martinez wiped down tables with methodical precision, her nursing textbooks tucked beneath the register, dreams deferred but never abandoned. Across town, in the penthouse of Blackstone Tower, Theodore Blackstone stood silhouetted against floor-to-ceiling windows, his $70 billion empire sprawling below like a glittering web of ambition and regret. The city pulsed with life he'd helped create but never truly lived, his wealth a fortress built around a heart that had stopped beating 23 years ago. What neither knew was that a crescent moon birthmark, delicate as a whisper, permanent as grief, would soon bridge the chasm between their worlds with devastating force. Have you ever wondered how a single moment can shatter everything you thought you knew about your life? Sophia's story began where most miracles do, in the space between desperation and hope. The morning sun hadn't yet touched Nashville's skyline when she finally peeled off her waitress apron, her third consecutive double shift complete. Her fingers, stained with coffee and calloused from years of carrying other people's meals, trembled as she counted the night's tips. $47.33. Not nearly enough. The hospital bill crumpled in her back pocket felt heavier than the industrial coffee pot she'd lifted thousands of times. Elena Martinez, the woman who'd found Sophia abandoned at a Tennessee rest stop 23 years ago and loved her as fiercely as any biological mother could, needed experimental treatment that insurance deemed investigational. Translation: your mother's life isn't worth our risk. Mija, Elena had whispered from her hospital bed just hours earlier, her once vibrant hands now translucent against white sheets. Perhaps it's time to accept. No. Sophia's voice had cut through the sanitized air like a blade. 72 hours, Mama. That's what Dr. Reeves said. 72 hours to secure the $50,000 down payment, and you get the treatment slot. Elena's eyes, the same warm brown that had dried Sophia's childhood tears, filled with a mixture of love and sorrow. Where will we find such money, mi amor? We are not people who have such things. But Sophia had already made her decision. She would work every available shift, sell everything they owned, beg if necessary. Because losing Elena meant losing the only person who'd ever seen Sophia Martinez as worthy of unconditional love. What would you sacrifice for the person who saved your life? The Rosewood Diner occupied a forgotten corner of downtown Nashville, squeezed between a pawn shop and a check-cashing place where dreams went to die. Sophia had worked there since high school. First to pay for her GED classes, then community college, now her online nursing program. Every late-night customer, every difficult table, every dismissive glance was a stepping stone toward a life where she could heal people instead of just serving them coffee. "Girl, you look like death warmed over," called Marcus, the night cook, as he flipped eggs with practiced efficiency. At 62, he'd seen enough to recognize when someone was carrying more than they could handle. Sophia managed a tired smile. "Just thinking about time, Marcus. How it moves too fast when you need it to slow down, too slow when you need it to fly." Marcus studied her face, really looked, the way he'd looked at his own daughter before cancer took her 5 years earlier. "This about your mama?" Sophia nodded, unable to trust her voice. Marcus had been there the night Elena collapsed during Sophia's shift, had helped carry her to the car with the kind of gentleness that only comes from understanding loss. "Listen to me, Sophia," Marcus said, setting down his spatula and giving her his full attention. "I've learned something about impossible situations. Sometimes the universe has a plan we can't see. Sometimes help comes from the places we least expect." Sophia wanted to believe him. But bills didn't pay themselves with hope, and time didn't pause for miracles. The morning crowd began filtering in, construction workers grabbing coffee before dawn shifts, nurses heading home from hospital rotations, taxi drivers fueling up for another day of carrying Nashville secrets. Sophia moved between them like a dancer who knew every step by heart, refilling cups before they emptied, anticipating needs before they were spoken. That's when she noticed him. The man in booth 7 wasn't like her usual customers. His clothes whispered money, not the flashy kind that demanded attention, but the quiet confidence of someone who'd never checked a price tag. His dark hair was threaded with silver, his face carrying the kind of weariness that came from success measured in everything except happiness. But it was his hands that captured Sophia's attention. They rested on the table, motionless, and on his left wrist was a birthmark she recognized like her own reflection. A crescent moon, identical to the one that had marked Sophia's wrist since birth, the one Elena used to trace with her finger while telling bedtime stories about daughters who were gifts from the stars. Why do you think some coincidences feel less like chance and more like destiny? Sophia approached his table with the coffee pot, her heart hammering against her ribs in a rhythm she couldn't explain. The man looked up, and she found herself staring into eyes the color of storm clouds, beautiful and haunted. "More coffee, sir?" she asked, proud that her voice remained steady. He nodded absently, lost in thoughts that seemed to weigh more than mountains. As Sophia poured, she noticed a photograph tucked partially beneath his phone. A young woman with dark hair and eyes that sparkled with the kind of joy that belonged to people who believed in forever. Something about the woman's face stirred a memory Sophia couldn't quite grasp, like trying to hold water in cupped hands. "She's beautiful," Sophia said softly, gesturing toward the photo. The man's entire body went rigid. When he looked up, his expression had transformed from distant to devastated. "She was," he whispered. 23 years ago, she was the most beautiful thing in my world." Sophia's pulse quickened. 23 years. The same amount of time since Elena had found a baby at that Tennessee rest stop, since Sophia's life had begun in the arms of a stranger who became everything. "I'm sorry for your loss," Sophia said, meaning it in ways she couldn't articulate. The man studied her face with an intensity that made Sophia feel transparent, as if he could see through to her very soul. "What's your name?" "Sophia. Sophia Martinez." Something shifted in his expression, recognition, maybe, or hope trying to resurrect itself from ash. That's when Sophia made a decision that would change everything. She glanced around the nearly empty diner, then sat down across from him, something she'd never done with a customer in 6 years of waitressing. "Sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I don't know why I'm telling you this, but—" She unconsciously touched her wrist, where her sleeve covered the birthmark that had always reached across the table with a shaking hand and traced the birthmark on her wrist with his finger, exactly the way Elena had done thousands of times. "My God," he breathed. "It's impossible. You're supposed to be dead." Before Sophia could ask what he meant, before she could demand answers to questions she didn't know how to ask, the man's eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed face first onto the diner table, unconscious. The coffee cup shattered against the floor, its contents spreading like spilled secrets across the linoleum, where Sophia Martinez had just discovered that everything she thought she knew about her life was about to change forever. And somewhere across Nashville, in a corner office overlooking the city, a phone was ringing with news that would set in motion events 23 years in the making. The ambulance sirens that shattered the pre-dawn quiet of downtown Nashville carried more than just an unconscious billionaire. They carried the weight of a secret that had been buried for 23 years, clawing its way back to the surface with the force of an earthquake. What happens when the past refuses to stay dead? Sophia Martinez stood in the empty parking lot of Rosewood Diner, watching red and blue lights disappear into the maze of Nashville's sleeping streets. The paramedics had asked her questions she couldn't answer. Did she know the man's name? Any medical history? Emergency contacts? All she could tell them was that he'd looked at her birthmark like he'd seen a ghost. Inside the diner, Marcus swept up the shattered coffee cup, shaking his head. 27 years I've worked the night shift, he muttered. Never seen anything like that. Man looked at you like you were Jesus and Elvis rolled into one. Sophia touched her wrist where the stranger's finger had traced her birthmark. The skin still tingled from that brief contact, as if some invisible current had passed between them. Marcus, do you believe some people are meant to meet? The old cook paused his sweeping. Child, in my experience, the universe don't waste coincidences. When something impossible happens, it's usually because someone needs it to happen. But Sophia couldn't shake the man's final words. You're supposed to be dead. What kind of person looks at a waitress in downtown Nashville and sees someone who should be in a grave? 3 hours earlier, across the city, the Blackstone Foundation Gala had been Nashville's social event of the season. 2,000 of America's wealthiest gathering at the Opryland Resort to to write checks that would ease their consciences and secure their legacies. Theodore Blackstone, the evening's reluctant guest of honor, had delivered his speech about giving back to communities with the practiced precision of a man who'd learned to hide his soul behind corporate rhetoric. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the weight of 23 years of guilt pressed against his chest like a physical thing. Theodore, magnificent speech as always, gushed Catherine Pembroke, Nashville's self-appointed queen of high society. Though you did seem a bit distant tonight. Everything all right? Theo forced a smile that never reached his eyes. Just tired, Catherine. Long week. What he didn't say. Every week was long when you carried the ghost of the woman you'd failed, the child you'd never known, the family you'd destroyed with your cowardice and pride. The gala's after-party had relocated to the Rosewood Hotel's penthouse, but Theo had escaped the champagne and hollow laughter, wandering Nashville's empty streets like a man searching for absolution in neon signs and 24-hour diners. That's how Theodore Blackstone, founder of a tech empire worth $70 billion, owner of half of downtown Nashville, found himself in booth 7 of the Rosewood Diner at 3 a.m., staring at a photograph of Isabella Chun. Isabella. The name still sent lightning through his nervous system. She'd been 22 when they met, a brilliant computer science student at Vanderbilt, her eyes bright with dreams of changing the world through code. Theo had been 25, already showing signs of the business acumen that would make him legendary, but still young enough to believe love conquered everything. For 6 months, they'd been inseparable. She'd helped him debug his first major software breakthrough, while he'd shown her that success didn't have to mean selling your soul. They'd talked about marriage, about building something beautiful together, a life, a company, a family. Then came the phone call that changed everything. Theodore, your father's had a heart attack. The board is panicking. You need to choose. Come home and take control of the company, or watch everything your family built crumble to dust. His sister Victoria's voice had been ice-cold with manipulation, but the urgency was real. The family business was hemorrhaging money, and competitors were circling like vultures. Theo had a choice. Abandon Isabella and their unborn child to save his family's legacy, or let 3 generations of work dissolve into bankruptcy. I'll be back, he'd promised Isabella, kissing her forehead as she slept. 2 weeks, maybe 3. We'll figure this out together when I return. But crises have a way of multiplying. 2 weeks became 2 months. Isabella's phone calls, desperate at first, gradually became resigned, then stopped altogether. By the time Theo had stabilized the company and fought his way back to Nashville, Isabella Chun had vanished without a trace. The apartment they'd shared was empty. Vanderbilt had no forwarding address. Her few friends claimed ignorance with the kind of conviction that suggested loyalty. Then came the call that shattered his world completely. Victoria's voice again, this time heavy with manufactured grief. Theodore, I'm so sorry. There's been an accident. Isabella and the baby, they're gone. Car crash on Highway 40. No survivors. Theo had screamed until his voice died, then spent the next 6 months drinking himself toward an early grave. When he finally crawled back to functionality, he'd thrown himself into work with the fury of a man trying to outrun his own demons. 23 years later, he'd built an empire but never built a life. Made billions but never made peace with the choice that had cost him everything that mattered. And now, at 3 a.m. in a downtown diner, a waitress had shown him a birthmark that belonged to a ghost. Sir? Sir, can you hear me? Sophia's voice pulled Theo back from the edge of unconsciousness. He was lying on the diner floor, looking up at fluorescent lights that seemed to pulse like dying stars. The waitress, Sophia, knelt beside him, her face creased with worry. Don't try to sit up yet, she said gently. The paramedics are on their way. Theo struggled to focus, his mind reeling between past and present. Your birthmark, he whispered. The crescent moon. Where did you get it? Sophia looked confused. I was born with it. My mother says. Your mother? Theo's voice was urgent now, adrenaline fighting through his disorientation. What's her name? Elena Martinez. She found me when I was a baby, adopted me. Sophia hesitated, studying his face. Why? Do you know something about my birth parents? The world seemed to tilt around Theo. Elena Martinez. Not Isabella Chun. But the birthmark was identical, and the timeline. God, the timeline fit perfectly. What year were you born? He whispered. 2002. January 15th. The doctors think I was maybe 3 days old when Elena found me at a rest stop near Dixon, Tennessee. Theo finished, his voice barely audible. Sophia's eyes widened. How could you possibly know that? Theo closed his eyes, 23 years of grief and guilt crashing over him like a tsunami. Isabella had been driving to Dixon the night she died. Her aunt lived there, one of the few family members who'd accepted their relationship. If she'd survived the crash, if she'd somehow made it to that rest stop. Because, Theo whispered, opening his eyes to look at the young woman who had his lost love's nose, his own stubborn chin, and a birthmark that marked her as his flesh and blood. I think I'm your father. The words hung in the air like smoke from a just-fired gun. Sophia's face went through a dozen emotions: confusion, disbelief, hope, terror. That's impossible, she breathed. My parents died in an accident. Elena told me. Elena lied, Theo said, struggling to sit up despite Sophia's protests. Or someone lied to Elena. Or, his mind raced through possibilities, each more devastating than the last. Sophia, what did Elena tell you about how she found you? She said I was alone at the rest stop, wrapped in a pink blanket with a note pinned to it. The note just said, please love her. No signature, no explanation. Sophia's voice was growing smaller, more afraid. She tried to find my parents through official channels, but there were no missing baby reports, no leads. It was like I'd appeared out of nowhere. Theo felt pieces of a puzzle clicking together with terrifying precision. Isabella had been driving to Dixon when Victoria called with news of the accident. But what if there had been no accident? What if Isabella had made it to the rest stop, given birth alone, then what? Disappeared? Died of complications? Been murdered? And if Sophia was truly his daughter, that meant someone had orchestrated one of the cruelest deceptions in history. Have you ever realized that the person you trusted most might be your greatest enemy? The ambulance arrived with a symphony of sirens and flashing lights, but Theo refused treatment. He had more important things to do than worry about his own health. Sophia, he said, gripping her hand with desperate intensity. I need you to trust me. I know this sounds insane, but I think someone has been lying to both of us for 23 years. Someone who wanted us to never find each other. Sophia looked at this stranger, this man who claimed to be her father, and felt something deep in her chest recognize him on a cellular level. What do you want me to do? She whispered. Theo pulled out his phone, his fingers shaking as he dialed a number he hadn't called in months. Patrick? It's Theo. I need you to run a DNA test, emergency priority. And Patrick. His voice turned cold as winter steel. I need you to investigate my sister. Everything. Financial records, phone calls, travel history. Go back 23 years. He hung up and looked at Sophia with eyes that blazed with 23 years of suppressed fury. I want you to help me find out who stole our lives, he said. And when we find them, I want you to help me make sure they pay for every single day we lost. But as Theo spoke those words, neither he nor Sophia noticed the black sedan that had been parked across the street since the ambulance arrived, or the woman inside it who was already dialing a number with hands that shook not from grief, but from fear. It's me, Victoria Blackstone-Hayes whispered into her phone. We have a problem. The stress of Sophia's mysterious disappearance from her shift, combined with the cancer's relentless progression, had triggered complications the doctors called concerning. The treatment window is closing, Dr. Reeves had explained with clinical gentleness. Without the down payment by tonight, we'll have to release the slot to the next patient. I'm sorry, but the Research Foundation is very strict about their protocols. 43 hours. That's all Sophia had left to save the woman who'd saved her. Her phone buzzed with an unknown number. Sophia Martinez? The voice was crisp, professional, intimidating. Yes. This is Linda Morrison from Nashville Metropolitan Human Resources. We've received some concerning reports about your conduct at various establishments around the city. We need to speak with you immediately regarding your employment eligibility status. Sophia's heart sank. I don't understand. What reports? Assault allegations, ma'am. Multiple witnesses have come forward claiming you physically attacked a prominent business figure at the Rosewood Diner early this morning. We're required by law to investigate any claims involving service industry workers and public safety. The room seemed to spin around Sophia. That's completely false. I helped him when he collapsed. I called the paramedics. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come to our offices immediately. Until this investigation is resolved, you're on the city's employment restriction list. No Nashville business can legally hire you." The line went dead. Sophia stared at her phone in disbelief. Someone was systematically destroying her ability to earn money, and they were doing it with surgical precision. But who had the power to manipulate city employment records? And why target a nobody waitress from downtown? Unless she wasn't a nobody anymore. That afternoon, Blackstone Industries' executive floor. Theodore Blackstone stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, looking out at a city he'd helped build but never felt connected to. The DNA results wouldn't be ready for another day, but every instinct he possessed screamed that Sophia Martinez was his daughter, the child he'd thought dead for 23 years. "Theodore," Victoria's voice was silk hiding steel as she entered without knocking. "We need to talk." Theo turned to face his younger sister, noting the predatory gleam in her eyes that always appeared when she perceived a threat to their empire. Victoria had been invaluable in building Blackstone Industries. Her ruthless business instincts had complemented his innovative vision perfectly. But there had always been something cold at her core, something that made Theo grateful they were allies rather than enemies. "What's on your mind, Vic?" "I'm concerned about you," Victoria said, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. "Marcus from the diner called this morning. Said you collapsed last night. Something about a waitress and a birthmark? I think your guilt over Isabella is starting to affect your judgment." Theo studied his sister's face, looking for any sign of deception. "Her name is Sophia Martinez. She has Isabella's birthmark, Vic, exactly the same shape, same location. She was born in 2002 and found abandoned at a rest stop near Dixon." Victoria's expression didn't change, but Theo caught the smallest tightening around her eyes. "Theodore, you can't seriously believe. I've ordered DNA tests," Theo interrupted. "Patrick Chun is handling it personally. We should have results by tomorrow." This time, Victoria couldn't hide her reaction. Her face went completely pale, and for just a moment, Theo saw something like panic flicker across her features. "Patrick Chun?" she whispered. "Isabella's cousin? Theodore, he's hated our family for 23 years. You can't trust him with something this important. He's the best geneticist on the East Coast, and he has no reason to lie about DNA results," Theo said firmly. "If Sophia is my daughter, if she's a fraud looking to exploit your guilt." Victoria's voice cracked like a whip. "Theodore, think about this logically. A convenient birthmark? A sob story about medical bills. This girl shows up right when the quarterly earnings reports are due, right when the board is questioning your focus." Theo felt anger building in his chest, hot and righteous. "Are you suggesting this is some elaborate con?" "I'm suggesting you're being manipulated by a gold digger who did her homework." Victoria leaned forward, her voice dropping to the tone she used when closing billion-dollar deals. "I had her investigated, Theodore. Sophia Martinez has gambling debts, drug connections, a history of lying to employers. She's exactly the kind of person who would prey on a grieving man's fantasies." Every word hit Theo like a physical blow. Could he be that desperate? That foolish? Had 23 years of guilt made him vulnerable to the first pretty girl with a similar birthmark? But then he remembered the way Sophia had looked at him, not with calculation, but with genuine concern. The way she'd knelt beside him when he collapsed, calling for help instead of rifling through his wallet. The way her eyes had held the same mixture of strength and vulnerability he'd loved in Isabella. "I'm proceeding with the DNA test," he said quietly. Victoria's mask slipped completely, revealing something ugly and desperate underneath. "Theodore, if you pursue this fantasy, it will destroy everything we've built. The board, the investors, the shareholders, they need leadership, not a man chasing ghosts. And if this girl is some long-lost daughter, what happens to the succession plan? What happens to me?" There it was. The truth behind Victoria's concern wasn't about protecting him. It was about protecting her own future as heir to the Blackstone empire. "If Sophia is my daughter," Theo said slowly, "then she's family. And family comes first. Always." The words hung between them like a declaration of war. That evening, Riverside Apartments. Sophia climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment with leaden feet, exhaustion and despair weighing her down like gravity itself. The day had been a nightmare of closed doors and hostile voices. Every restaurant, every diner, every coffee shop in Nashville had somehow learned about her employment restriction. The story had spread like wildfire. Sophia Martinez, the waitress who attacked Theodore Blackstone. The irony was devastating. The man who might be her father had become the weapon someone was using to destroy her. She opened her apartment door to find Elena sitting at their tiny kitchen table, her face ashen but determined. "Mama." Sophia rushed to her side. "You shouldn't be out of the hospital." "They discharged me," Elena said quietly. "Said there was nothing more they could do without the treatment." She looked up at Sophia with eyes that held 23 years of love and sorrow. "Mija, we need to talk about your real parents." Sophia's heart stopped. "What?" Elena's hands trembled as she reached into her purse and pulled out a small wooden box Sophia had seen countless times but never been allowed to open. "I lied to you, mi amor. All these years, I lied because I was afraid." With shaking fingers, Elena opened the box and removed a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, and a small silver locket. "This is the note that was with you when I found you," Elena whispered. "And this locket, it has a picture inside." Sophia took the locket with hands that shook like leaves in a hurricane. She pressed the tiny clasp, and the locket opened to reveal a photograph of a young woman with kind eyes and a brilliant smile. A woman who looked exactly like Sophia would in 10 years. Her name was Isabella, Elena said, her voice breaking. "Isabella Chun. And on the back of her picture is a phone number and an address. I called it once, years ago, but the man who answered, he told me she was dead, that she died in a car accident, and if I ever called again, he'd make sure I joined her." Sophia turned the photo over and read the faded ink, "Isabella Chun, and a phone number. If something happens to me, call Theodore. Tell him I never stopped loving him." The room seemed to tilt around Sophia. Theodore, the man from the diner. The billionaire who'd collapsed when he saw her birthmark. The father who'd thought her dead for 23 years. "Someone has been lying to all of us," Sophia whispered. Elena nodded, tears streaming down her face. "And now they're trying to destroy you because you found each other. Mija, I think we're all in terrible danger." As if summoned by her words, Sophia's phone rang. Unknown number. "Miss Martinez?" The voice was smooth, cultured, and cold as winter death. "This is Victoria Blackstone Hayes, Theodore's sister and COO of Blackstone Industries." Sophia's blood turned to ice. "How did you get this number?" "I get whatever I want, dear. Now listen carefully, because I'm only going to say this once. You are not Theodore's daughter. You are a gold-digging little nobody who's trying to exploit a grieving man's fantasies. And if you don't disappear from Nashville by tomorrow night, I will make sure you and your precious Elena disappear permanently. You can't threaten us. I can do whatever I want." Victoria's voice turned sharp as broken glass. "I have unlimited resources, unlimited connections, and 23 years of experience making problems go away. Do you really think one pathetic waitress and a dying woman can stand against the full power of the Blackstone Empire?" The line went dead. Sophia looked at Elena, seeing her own terror reflected in her mother's eyes. "Pack a bag, Mama," Sophia whispered. "We're leaving Nashville tonight." But as they began gathering their few precious belongings, neither woman noticed the black sedan parked across the street, or the men inside it who were already loading bullets into expensive guns. Victoria Blackstone Hayes had given Sophia Martinez a choice: disappear voluntarily or disappear permanently. And Victoria had never been the patient type. The abandoned warehouse in East Nashville had been Victoria's killing ground for 23 years, a place where problems went to die and secrets went to be buried. As she stood among the rusted machinery and broken windows, watching her hired men load their weapons, she felt the same cold satisfaction she'd experienced when Isabella Chun had breathed her last breath in this exact spot. History was about to repeat itself, with one crucial difference. This time, there would be no survivors to complicate the narrative. How many lies can a family bury before the truth claws its way out of the grave? "The targets are at Riverside Apartments, Unit 4B, Victoria told the 3 men she'd used for wet work since her early 20s. They were professionals, expensive, discreet, and completely without conscience. Make it look like a home invasion gone wrong. Elena Martinez dies of her injuries. Sophia Martinez disappears forever. No bodies that can be identified. The team leader, a man Victoria knew only as Crane, nodded with the calm efficiency of someone who'd orchestrated dozens of similar disappearances. Timeline. Tonight. Before my brother gets the DNA results back. Victoria's voice was ice and steel. Theodore can grieve for his imaginary daughter, but he can't grieve for someone who never existed. Meanwhile, across town, Theodore Blackstone hadn't slept in 36 hours. He stood in his private study, surrounded by photographs, documents, and memories he'd kept locked away for over 2 decades. Isabella's face smiled at him from a dozen different frames. Graduation photos, candid shots of their time together, the last picture they'd taken before everything fell apart. His phone buzzed, a text from Patrick Chun. DNA results ready. Meet me at the lab. Theo, you need to prepare yourself. What I found goes deeper than just paternity. Theo's hands shook as he replied, on my way. But as he grabbed his car keys, another message appeared, this one from an unknown number. Stop looking for answers you won't like. Some daughters are better off dead. The threat was clear, unmistakable, and absolutely terrifying. Someone knew about Sophia, knew about the DNA test, and was willing to kill to keep the truth buried. Theo immediately called Sophia's number. It went straight to voicemail. At that same moment, Riverside Apartments. Sophia and Elena moved through their tiny apartment like ghosts, packing only what they could carry and praying they had enough time to escape whatever net was closing around them. Sophia had turned off her phone after Victoria's call. If Theodore Blackstone's sister could get her number, she could probably track her location. Mija, Elena whispered as she folded her few precious photographs into a small suitcase. There's something else I never told you. About the night I found you. Sophia looked up from stuffing her nursing textbooks into a backpack. They might be running for their lives, but she wouldn't abandon her dreams of healing people. What, Mama? Elena's eyes were haunted by memories she'd tried to forget. I wasn't just driving through that rest stop by accident. I was running away from Nashville, from a man who'd been hurting me. I thought I was going to die that night, alone and scared. Sophia stopped packing. Mama, but then I heard you crying, saw you wrapped in that pink blanket like a gift from God himself. And I realized that maybe we were both meant to be rescued that night. Maybe you saved me as much as I saved you. Tears ran down Sophia's face as she understood the deeper truth. Elena Martinez hadn't just adopted a baby 23 years ago. She'd found her reason to live. We're going to get through this, Sophia said fiercely. Both of us. Together. But as the words left her mouth, Elena suddenly grabbed Sophia's arm, her face white with terror. The lights, she whispered. Sophia looked toward their front window. The streetlight that had illuminated the parking lot for years was suddenly dark. And in that unnatural darkness, shadows were moving. Professional shadows. The fire escape, Sophia breathed. Now. Vanderbilt University Medical Center, Genetics Lab. Patrick Chun looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past day. When Theo arrived at the lab, he found Isabella's cousin standing before a wall of monitors displaying DNA sequences that looked like digital poetry written in the language of life itself. Patrick. Theo's voice was careful, controlled. What did you find? Patrick turned around, and Theo saw something in his eyes that made his blood run cold. Not just confirmation, devastation. She's your daughter, Patrick said simply. Sophia Martinez is definitely your biological child. 99.9% certainty. Theo felt his knees go weak. 23 years of grief. 23 years of thinking he'd failed the two people he'd loved most in the world, and his daughter had been alive the entire time. But that's not the worst part, Patrick continued, his voice hollow. Theo, I ran Elena Martinez's DNA too, from samples I obtained through unofficial channels. And Elena Martinez is Isabella Chun. She didn't die in a car accident 23 years ago. She survived, but she suffered severe head trauma that caused amnesia. She has no memory of her life before the injury, no memory of you, no memory of giving birth to Sophia. The room spun around Theo like a carnival ride designed by sadists. Isabella was alive, had been alive for 23 years, living in poverty, raising their daughter alone, never knowing that the father of her child was one of the richest men in America. How is that possible? Theo whispered. Victoria said she saw the death certificates, the police reports. Those were forgeries, Patrick said grimly. Professional-grade forgeries that would have fooled anyone 23 years ago. Someone with significant resources orchestrated Isabella's disappearance, paid for fake documentation, and made sure you never looked too closely at the evidence. Theo's mind reeled through the implications. Someone had stolen 23 years of his life, 23 years of Isabella's life. 23 years of Sophia's childhood. Someone had condemned him to decades of guilt, while Isabella struggled in poverty and amnesia. Someone who had access to his personal information, who knew about the pregnancy, who had the connections to orchestrate such an elaborate deception. Patrick, Theo said slowly. Who called you 23 years ago? When Isabella supposedly died. Who gave you the news? Patrick's face crumpled. Your sister, Victoria, called me, crying, said there had been a terrible accident. She seemed so devastated, so genuine. I never questioned. Victoria. Theo's voice was barely human now, more growl than speech. My sister has been lying to me for 23 years. His phone rang. Sophia's number. Sophia. Theo answered immediately. Where are you? Are you safe? But the voice that responded wasn't Sophia's. It was Victoria's. Hello, brother dear. Looking for your bastard daughter? I'm afraid she's having some unexpected complications this evening. Victoria, what have you done? I've cleaned up a mess that should have stayed buried. Even if they survive this night, Elena might not live to see another dawn. Meanwhile, downtown Nashville, Theodore Blackstone drove through the city like a man possessed, his Bentley taking corners at speeds that would have been reckless if he'd cared whether he lived or died. Patrick Chin sat in the passenger seat, both of them calling every contact they had, police, private security, FBI connections, anyone who might help them find Sophia before Victoria's killers completed their work. The police say they can't act on a vague threat, Patrick reported after his fifth call. No evidence of actual wrongdoing. No proof that Sophia's in immediate danger. She's my daughter, Theo snarled, running a red light as he turned toward Riverside Apartments. And Victoria is trying to murder her to protect her own inheritance. How much more evidence do they need? But when they arrived at Sophia's apartment building, they found only destruction. The front door hanging off its hinges, furniture overturned, and clear signs of a struggle. A neighbor peeked out from behind her door, eyes wide with fear. They ran, the woman whispered. The girl and her mama went down the fire escape just before the men with guns broke in. Haven't seen them since. Theo felt his heart shatter. His daughter, the child he'd thought dead for 23 years, was running for her life through Nashville's dark streets, hunted by killers paid for with his own family's money. Back at the textile factory, Sophia helped Elena deeper into the maze of abandoned machinery, searching for a hiding place that might keep them alive until dawn. But Elena was getting weaker, her breathing more labored, and Sophia could hear their hunters getting closer. Mija, Elena whispered, her voice barely audible. Leave me here. Run. Save yourself. Never, Sophia hissed back. We survive together or not at all. But even as she said the words, Sophia knew their situation was hopeless. Elena couldn't run anymore. They had no weapons, no allies, no way to call for help. The men hunting them were professionals with unlimited resources and 23 years of experience making people disappear. That's when Sophia heard the voice that changed everything. Sophia Martinez? The shout echoed through the factory like thunder. This is Victoria Blackstone Hayes. I know you can hear me. Sophia's blood turned to ice. Theodore's sister was here personally, come to watch them die. You've caused me considerable inconvenience, Victoria continued, her cultured voice carrying easily through the empty space. 23 years ago, I eliminated a problem that should have stayed eliminated. Your mother was a greedy little nobody who tried to trap my brother with a bastard baby. I did what needed to be done to protect our family. Elena's face went white as fragments of memory began surfacing. Flashes of a car accident that hadn't been an accident, of waking up in a hospital with no past, of a voice on the phone years later threatening death if she ever tried to remember. Isabella, Elena breathed, the name falling from her lips like a prayer. My name was Isabella. But you survived. Victoria's voice was getting closer now, accompanied by the footsteps of her killers. Somehow, impossibly, you survived. And you raised Theodore's brat right under our noses, collecting welfare and food stamps when you could have been living in luxury as a Blackstone. Sophia felt rage building in her chest, hot and righteous. This woman, this monster, had stolen 23 years from all of them, had condemned her mother to poverty and amnesia, her father to guilt and grief, and herself to growing up without knowing where she came from or why she mattered. The beautiful irony, Victoria continued, is that Theodore will never know the truth. He'll spend the rest of his life grieving for a daughter who disappeared, never knowing that his own sister murdered her to protect his fortune. That's when Sofia Martinez made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She stepped out of hiding. Victoria Blackstone Hayes. Sophia's voice rang through the factory with the force of 23 years of righteous anger. I'm right here. If you want to kill me, do it yourself instead of hiding behind hired guns like the coward you are. Flashlight beams swung toward her, illuminating Sophia's face as she stood defiantly in the center of the factory floor. She looked exactly like her mother had at that age, beautiful, determined, and utterly unafraid of death if it meant protecting the people she loved. Victoria stepped into the light, flanked by her 3 killers, and Sophia saw her face for the first time. She was elegant, expensively dressed, and completely without conscience. A woman who'd built her life on other people's graves. You look just like her, Victoria said with clinical interest. Same foolish idealism, same misguided sense of nobility. Isabella thought love would conquer everything too, right up until the moment my men put a bullet in her brain. Elena gasped from her hiding place, more memories flooding back. The pain, the betrayal, the moment she'd realized Theodore's own sister had orchestrated everything. But you made a mistake, Sophia said, stepping closer to Victoria despite the guns pointed at her heart. You underestimated what a daughter will do to protect her mother. Victoria laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. What can one pathetic waitress do against the full power of the Blackstone Empire? You have no money, no connections, no weapons. You're nothing. Sophia smiled, and in that smile, Victoria finally saw Theodore's stubborn determination and Isabella's unbreakable spirit combined into something truly dangerous. I may be nothing, Sophia said quietly, but I'm nothing with nothing left to lose. And that makes me the most dangerous person in this room. Before Victoria could react, Sophia grabbed a piece of rusted machinery and hurled it through the factory's largest window. The glass exploded outward in a symphony of destruction that echoed across the Nashville night like a scream for help. Car alarms began wailing. Dogs started barking. Lights flickered on in distant buildings. And somewhere in that cacophony of noise, Sophia heard the most beautiful sound in the world, sirens. Police, came a shout from outside. Building is surrounded. Victoria's face twisted with rage and disbelief. How did they? Because, came a familiar voice from the factory entrance. I've been tracking my sister's phone for the past hour. Theodore Blackstone stepped into the light, flanked by a dozen police officers and FBI agents. His face was a mask of fury and betrayal as he looked at the sister who'd stolen 23 years of his life. Hello, Victoria, he said quietly. We need to talk. But the night's revelations were far from over. What happened next would either deliver justice 23 years in the making, or destroy the last chance Sofia Martinez had of saving the woman who'd raised her with love born from lies. And in the shadows of that abandoned factory, Elena Martinez began to remember everything, including the one secret that would change all their lives forever. The secret Victoria had killed to protect. The secret that would either save them all or damn them to repeat the tragedies of the past. Subscribe now, because some family secrets are worth dying for. And this story is about to reveal the truth that 3 people have been searching for their entire lives. The abandoned textile factory had become a theater of justice 23 years in the making. As police officers secured the scene and paramedics rushed to Elena's side, Victoria Blackstone Hayes stood in handcuffs, her perfectly composed mask finally cracking to reveal the desperate killer underneath. But the night's revelations were far from over. What happens when the victim becomes the one holding all the cards? Theodore, Victoria snarled as FBI agents read her rights. You have no idea what you've done. Some secrets should stay buried. Theo knelt beside Elena's stretcher, looking into the face of the woman he'd loved and lost, and never stopped mourning. Even ravaged by cancer and 23 years of poverty, Isabella Chun was still the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Isabella, he whispered, touching her hand with fingers that shook like autumn leaves. I'm so sorry. I never stopped looking for you. I never stopped loving you. Elena's eyes fluttered open, and for the first time in over 2 decades, they held recognition. The trauma of the night, the shock of seeing Theodore alive, had shattered the walls that amnesia had built around her memories. Theodore, her voice was barely a whisper. Is it really you? It's me, sweetheart. I'm here. I'm finally here. But Elena's expression wasn't relief, it was terror. Theodore, you have to listen to me, she said urgently, gripping his hand with surprising strength. Victoria, she didn't just try to kill me 23 years ago. She didn't just steal our daughter. There's something else, something worse. Sophia knelt on Elena's other side, tears streaming down her face as she watched her parents reunite after more than 2 decades of separation. But Elena's words sent ice through her veins. What else, Mama? What else did she do? Elena's eyes darted toward Victoria, who had gone completely rigid despite her restraints. She has another daughter. Theodore, Victoria has been lying about more than just my death. The factory fell silent except for the hum of police radios and the distant wail of sirens. Theo stared at Elena in confusion. Another daughter? Victoria's never been married, never had children. No, Elena whispered, her voice growing stronger as more memories flooded back. Not Victoria's daughter. Yours. The words hit Theodore like a physical blow. That's impossible. You were pregnant with Sophia. Twins, Elena breathed. I was pregnant with twins, Theodore. Sophia had a sister. Have you ever discovered that everything you thought you knew was just the surface of a much deeper truth? The revelation shattered through the factory like an earthquake. Sophia felt the world tilt around her as she realized she'd had a sister, a twin sister, for 23 years and never known it. Where is she? Theo demanded, his voice rough with 23 years of compounded grief. Where is my other daughter? Elena's eyes filled with tears as she looked directly at Victoria. Tell him, she whispered. Tell him what you did with our other baby. Victoria's composure finally broke completely. Her face contorted with rage, fear, and something that might have been guilt in someone with a conscience. She was weak. Victoria screamed, struggling against her handcuffs. Premature, sickly, crying constantly. Isabella was bleeding to death, and I had 2 screaming babies and a dying woman to deal with. I made a choice. What choice? Theo's voice was barely human now. I saved the stronger one, Victoria spat. I left Sophia at the rest stop where someone might find her and give her a decent life. But the other one, she was too small, too weak. She would have died anyway. Sophia felt her heart stop. You killed my sister? I gave her a merciful death instead of a slow one. Victoria's voice cracked with 23 years of justification. And I made sure you grew up without the burden of knowing you'd failed to save her. But Elena was shaking her head, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth despite her tears. She's lying, Elena whispered. She's still lying. All eyes turned to the dying woman who held the final piece of a puzzle that had destroyed 3 lives. The other baby didn't die, Elena continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. Victoria took her, raised her as her own daughter, told everyone she'd adopted a child from overseas. The factory went so quiet that the sound of Theodore's heart breaking was audible. Victoria, he said slowly, where's Lily? Victoria's face went ashen. Lily Hayes, the brilliant, accomplished young woman Victoria had raised, the daughter she'd groomed to take over Blackstone Industries alongside Theo, the heir apparent who'd been at Victoria's side through every major business decision for the past 5 years. Lily is not your daughter, Victoria whispered, but her voice held no conviction. Lily, who graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Business School, Theo continued, pieces clicking into place with devastating precision. Lily, who has your last name, but has never looked anything like you. Lily, who has always seemed familiar to me in ways I couldn't explain. Sophia's mind reeled as she thought about the woman she'd seen in newspaper photos standing beside Victoria at corporate events. Elegant, poised, beautiful in a way that reminded Sophia of looking in a funhouse mirror. She has our birthmark, Elena whispered. Lily Hayes has the crescent moon birthmark, just like Sophia. Just like you, Theodore. The truth crashed over everyone in the factory like a tsunami. Victoria hadn't just stolen one daughter, she'd stolen both. She'd raised Sophia's twin sister as her own child, groomed her as the heir to an empire built on murder and lies, and turned her into an unwitting accomplice in the very conspiracy that had destroyed her real family. What would you do if you discovered your entire life had been built on your parents' graves? Theodore pulled out his phone with hands that shook like earthquake aftershocks and dialed a number he'd called hundreds of times. Lily? It's Uncle Theodore. I need you to come to the old textile factory on Industrial Boulevard immediately. Yes, I know it's 3 a.m. Bring Patrick Chin with you. And Lily. His voice cracked. Bring a DNA testing kit. As they waited for Lily Hayes, Sophia Martinez's twin sister, to arrive, the factory filled with the weight of 23 years of lies finally collapsing under the pressure of truth. And in the distance, the first hints of dawn began to paint the Nashville sky, as if the universe itself was ready for this long night of secrets to finally end. But the hardest revelation was yet to come, because Lily Hayes had spent the past 5 years believing that Sophia Martinez was a threat to be eliminated. And some beliefs die harder than others. The moment when truth collides with a lifetime of lies is always an earthquake. Lily Hayes arrived at the textile factory in a silver Porsche that cost more than most people's houses. Her designer clothes and perfect composure a stark contrast to the industrial decay around her. At 23, she was everything Victoria had molded her to be. Brilliant, ruthless, and completely loyal to the Blackstone Empire. She was also, unknown to everyone including herself, Sophia Martinez's identical twin sister. Uncle Theodore? Lily's voice carried the crisp authority of someone raised in boardrooms and country clubs. What's going on? Why are you here with the police? Theo looked at this young woman he'd helped raise, seeing her clearly for the first time. The dark hair that matched Isabella's. The stubborn chin that mirrored his own. The grace and intelligence that had always reminded him of someone he couldn't place. His daughter. His stolen daughter. Lily, he said gently, I need you to sit down. What I'm about to tell you will change everything you think you know about your life. But Lily's attention had shifted to the paramedics loading Elena onto a stretcher. Her face went rigid with recognition, not of Elena, but of the birthmark visible on her wrist. That's impossible, Lily whispered. What's impossible? Patrick Chin asked, arriving behind her with his DNA testing equipment. Lily pulled up her sleeve, revealing her own crescent moon birthmark in the exact same location. She has my birthmark. How does she have my birthmark? Sophia stepped forward, and both women froze as they looked into faces that were mirrors of each other. Identical twins separated by 23 years of lies, finally in the same room. Because, Sophia said softly, we're sisters. What happens when you discover that everything you've been taught to hate is actually everything you've been missing? The DNA test took exactly 18 minutes. 18 minutes of silence so profound that the abandoned factory felt like a cathedral waiting for revelation. When Patrick Chin finally looked up from his portable analyzer, his face was pale with the weight of confirmation. Identical twins, he said simply. Sophia Martinez and Lily Hayes are identical twin sisters, and Theodore Blackstone is their biological father. Lily staggered backward as if she'd been shot. That's impossible. Victoria is my mother. She adopted me from overseas when I was an infant. Victoria stole you, Elena said weakly from her stretcher. She murdered me, or tried to, then took both my daughters and raised one while abandoning the other. That's insane, Lily said, but her voice held no conviction. Pieces were clicking into place. Why she'd never looked like Victoria, why there were no baby photos from her first year, why Victoria had always been strangely evasive about Lily's adoption story. Lily, Theodore said gently, do you remember when you started working at Blackstone Industries? 5 years ago, when Victoria first brought you into the executive training program. Of course, I was 18, fresh out of high school. Victoria said it was time I learned the family business. Do you remember what your first assignment was? Lily's face went pale as the memory surfaced. Market research. Victoria had me compile profiles on potential threats to the company. What kind of threats? Sophia asked, though she was beginning to suspect the answer. Gold diggers, Lily whispered. Women who might try to exploit Uncle Theodore's guilt over his lost family. Victoria had me create detailed psychological profiles on women who fit certain criteria. The factory fell silent as everyone realized what Lily was describing. She had you hunting for Sophia, Theo said grimly. For 5 years, Victoria used you to help her track down and eliminate any trace of your twin sister. Lily's composure finally cracked completely. She'd spent half a decade unknowingly hunting her own sister, building files on women who reminded Theodore of his lost love, helping Victoria identify and eliminate threats to an empire built on her parents' graves. The employment blacklisting, Sophia realized. The systematic destruction of my reputation. That wasn't just Victoria, that was you too. Lily nodded, tears streaming down her face. I thought I was protecting the family. Victoria said women like you were dangerous, that you'd destroy everything we'd built. I never knew. God, I never knew I was destroying my own sister. Have you ever realized that the person you've been taught to be isn't who you really are? Elena struggled to sit up on her stretcher, her dying body powered by a determination that transcended physical limitations. Girls, she whispered, come here. Both of you. Sophia and Lily approached hesitantly, twins meeting for the first time in 23 years. Elena took their hands, placing them together. You were born holding hands, Elena said, her voice barely audible. The doctor said they'd never seen anything like it. Two babies, fighting to come into the world together, refusing to let go of each other even when the cord was cut. Sophia and Lily looked down at their joined hands, identical hands, marked with identical birthmarks, carrying identical DNA and the memory of a connection that predated consciousness. I used to dream about you, Sophia whispered to her sister. Dreams of another girl who looked like me, who understood things I couldn't explain. I thought it was just my imagination. I had the same dreams, Lily breathed. Victoria said it was nonsense, that I was creating fantasies because I was lonely. She said I needed to focus on reality, on building something that mattered. You did build something that mattered, Elena said, smiling despite her pain. You built a life. Both of you. And now you have the chance to build one together. But even as the sisters held hands for the first time in over 2 decades, time was running out. Elena's condition was deteriorating rapidly, and the treatment deadline was only 14 hours away. The hospital, Sophia said urgently. Mama needs to get to the hospital for the treatment. Theo stood up, his face set with the determination that had built an empire. Patrick, call Dr. Reeves immediately. Tell him we're coming in with Elena Chun, not Martinez, Chun, and that money is no longer an object. Theodore, Elena whispered, the treatment costs. Isabella, Theo said, using her real name for the first time in 23 years. You are the mother of my children and the love of my life. Money is meaningless compared to saving you. But as they prepared to leave the factory, Victoria made one final desperate play. Lily, she screamed from the police car. Don't let them manipulate you. You're a Blackstone Hayes, not some nobody from the streets. You belong with me, not with them. Lily looked at the woman who'd raised her, the woman who'd murdered her mother and stolen her from her twin sister, the woman who'd built an empire on lies and called it love. Then she looked at Sophia, her mirror, her other half, the sister she'd been searching for in dreams for 23 years. No, Lily said firmly. I belong with my family. My real family. And as the police car carrying Victoria Blackstone Hayes disappeared into the Nashville dawn, 3 lives that had been shattered by greed and lies began the long journey toward healing. But the hardest test was still ahead, because saving Elena would require more than money. It would require forgiveness, sacrifice, and the kind of love that can resurrect the dead. Sometimes the universe saves its most beautiful miracles for the people who need them most. The Experimental Treatment Center at Vanderbilt University Medical Center had never seen anything quite like the scene unfolding in their executive conference room at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Theodore Blackstone, one of Nashville's most powerful men, sat beside a hospital bed holding the hand of a woman who'd been legally dead for 23 years, while identical twin daughters who'd never known each other existed worked together to save their mother's life. Dr. Sarah Reeves studied the medical files with the intensity of someone rewriting the laws of medicine. The treatment protocol is aggressive, she explained to the family gathered around Elena's bed. Experimental immunotherapy combined with targeted radiation. The success rate is promising, but given Mrs. Chen's current condition, what are her chances? Sophia asked, her voice steady despite the terror in her eyes. Without treatment, days, maybe a week. With treatment, 60% chance of full remission within 6 months. 60%. In the mathematics of miracles, sometimes that's enough. Do it, Theo said immediately. Whatever it costs, whatever it takes. But Elena weakly squeezed his hand, her voice barely a whisper. Theodore, the money. It should go to the girls, to their futures. Mama, Sophia interrupted gently. We already talked about this. You saved my life 23 years ago. Now it's my turn to save yours. Lily stepped forward, still adjusting to the reality of having a sister, a father, and a dying mother she'd never known she'd lost. Mrs. Chun, Mom, I have access to Victoria's accounts. Money she stole from our family over the years. It belongs to us anyway. The treatment began immediately. As Elena was wheeled into surgery, Theo gathered his daughters in the hospital chapel. A man who hadn't prayed in 23 years, suddenly desperate to believe in miracles. I don't know how to be a father, he admitted, looking at these two young women who carried his DNA and their mother's courage. I missed your first words, your first steps, your graduations. I missed everything that mattered. You didn't miss it by choice, Sophia said gently. Victoria stole it from all of us. But we have now, Lily added, still tentative in this new reality, but growing stronger by the hour. And if Mom survives, we'll have tomorrow too. Meanwhile, across the city, Victoria Blackstone Hayes sat in her jail cell, facing federal charges for murder, kidnapping, fraud, and conspiracy. 23 years of carefully constructed lies had collapsed in a single night, taking her empire and her freedom with them. Her lawyer, the best that money could buy, painted a grim picture. The DNA evidence is conclusive. Elena Chen's testimony is devastating. And Lily's cooperation with the prosecution makes your position challenging. Lily is making a mistake, Victoria said coldly. She'll realize that when the novelty wears off. She belongs in boardrooms, not playing house with criminals. Ms. Hayes, your adopted daughter. She's not adopted, Victoria snapped. She's stolen. I stole her to save the company, to protect the family legacy. Everything I did was to preserve what we'd built. But even as Victoria spoke, she knew her empire was crumbling. The board of directors had called an emergency meeting. Shareholders were demanding answers. The media was having a feeding frenzy with the story of Nashville's most powerful family built on murder and lies. The Blackstone legacy wasn't being preserved. It was being exposed as a monument to greed disguised as love. 6 hours later, Vanderbilt Medical Center. Elena emerged from surgery weak but alive, the first phase of treatment complete. As she drifted in and out of consciousness, her family maintained a vigil that looked nothing like the lonely death she'd expected just days before. Theodore read to her from books of poetry they'd shared as young lovers. Sophia studied her nursing textbooks, preparing for a future where she could heal people instead of just serving them coffee. Lily worked on her laptop, systematically dismantling Victoria's business empire and redirecting assets to charities that supported single mothers and abandoned children. She's dreaming, Sophia observed as Elena's face relaxed into something approaching peace. What do you think she's dreaming about? Lily asked. Us, Theo said softly. All of us together, the way we were supposed to be. 3 weeks later, the Blackstone Industries board meeting that would determine the company's future was standing room only, packed with journalists, shareholders, and curiosity seekers drawn by the most spectacular corporate scandal in Nashville history. Theodore Blackstone stood at the head of the conference table, flanked by his daughters, both of them, together for the first time in a professional setting. Elena sat in a wheelchair beside them, still weak from treatment, but showing signs of improvement that her doctors called remarkable. Ladies and gentlemen, Theo began, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd built an empire and now intended to redeem it. 3 weeks ago, this company was built on lies. Today, we're rebuilding it on truth. He gestured to Sophia and Lily. I'd like you to meet the new co-directors of Blackstone Industries Charitable Foundation. Sophia Martinez, who understands what it means to struggle for dignity in an indifferent world. And Lily Hayes, who understands what it means to discover that everything you believed about yourself was a lie designed to serve someone else's greed. The room buzzed with whispers and clicking cameras. Together, Theo continued. They'll be overseeing the transformation of this company from a monument to one family's ambition into a force for reuniting families that have been torn apart by poverty, crime, and circumstance. Sophia stepped forward, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. The Blackstone Second Chances Foundation will focus on 3 areas: providing emergency medical funding for families in crisis, supporting educational opportunities for young people aging out of foster care, and helping adoptees reconnect with their biological families when desired. Lily added, "We're also implementing new corporate policies that prioritize employee welfare, family leave, and ethical business practices. The days of treating people as disposable resources are over." But the most important transformation was happening elsewhere. 6 months later, Elena's apartment. The apartment on Music Row was nothing like the cramped unit at Riverside where Sophia had grown up. Spacious, bright, and filled with photographs of a family finally complete, it felt like the home Elena had always dreamed of providing, but never thought she deserved. Elena stood in the kitchen, her hair growing back in silver curls, her face fuller and brighter than it had been in years. The experimental treatment had worked. Full remission, with doctors calling her recovery unprecedented. "Breakfast is almost ready." She called to the living room where Sophia and Lily sat on opposite ends of the couch, sharing nursing textbooks. Both women had decided to pursue healthcare careers, Sophia continuing her nursing studies, Lily adding a pre-med track to her business degree. Theodore emerged from his study, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed grant applications for the foundation. At 55, he looked younger than he had in decades. The weight of 23 years of grief finally lifted from his shoulders. "Any interesting applications?" Sophia asked. "A single mother in Memphis whose daughter needs heart surgery," Theo replied. "A young man in Knoxville trying to reconnect with the family he was separated from in foster care. A woman in Chattanooga who just discovered she has a twin sister living 3 states away." "Approve them all," Lily said immediately. "Already did," Theo smiled. "Along with 47 others this week." Elena appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on an apron that read, "World's Best Mom." A gift from both daughters on her first Mother's Day with her memory intact. "Breakfast," she announced. "And before anyone argues, yes, you all need to eat. And some victories aren't worth the cost of your soul." But 4 miles away, in a bright apartment filled with the sounds of family, Sophia Martinez looked at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, tracing the crescent moon birthmark that had led her to everything she'd never known she was missing. In the next room, she could hear Lily practicing Spanish with Elena, Theodore making phone calls about foundation business, and the ordinary, extraordinary sounds of a family being itself. She thought about that night 3 weeks ago when she'd served coffee to a stranger who'd turned out to be her father. How a simple moment of kindness, noticing his grief, mentioning her mother's birthmark, had set in motion events that changed 4 lives forever. What if the smallest acts of compassion are actually the universe's way of healing its deepest wounds? Sophia smiled at her reflection, then returned to her family. There were nursing exams to study for, foundation grants to review, and a mother to spoil with the love they'd thought they'd lost forever. Outside, Nashville sparkled in the afternoon sun, a city where miracles happened every day to people brave enough to believe in second chances. And in apartment 12A on Music Row, the Martinez Blackstone Hayes family, complicated, reconstructed, and absolutely perfect in its imperfection, settled in to write the next chapter of a story that had been 23 years in the making. Some love stories end with a kiss. This one ended with a beginning. If this story touched your heart, you're not alone. Sometimes the most powerful tales are the ones that remind us that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who refuse to give up on you, no matter how lost you seem. Next week, we'll explore another story of hidden connections and second chances that will restore your faith in the impossible. Because in a world that often feels broken, sometimes we all need to be reminded that miracles are still possible.